Let's start chapter 4. Our chapter 4 is the chapter on consciousness. Why do I have 4 spellings? And why do I have psychology and 2 different spellings?
Which
Obviously,
focuses
I'm
on states
trying
of
to
consciousness.
persuade you
an
to
easy
put a
task,
little bit of
but
effort
one of these 4
and to
words
learn
is
this rather
consciousness
long word.
spelled correctly.
Actually, both these words we
On
tackled
the bottom
in the
you'll
very
see
first chapter.
psychology. Which one
It
of
should
those are
make a
spelled
difference,
correctly?
but it
You might
really
think, what's the
can
big deal?
if you
But
spell
if you do a whole chapter
if
on
you
a
mispronounce simple
concept,
words like
there'd be a reasonable
library
expectation to be able to spell it correctly.
correct
And
pronunciation
in terms of a
library.
course, if you do a whole course on a subject, it might
You
be a
might have to write
reasonable
it a few times. I
expectation
remember
to
that I
have you be able
definitely
to
struggle with
identify that
spelling
word
some of
correctly.
these words
And yet,
myself.
sadly, every year I have
But anyway,
students on the final exam
this chapter is
misspell
a
the word
particularly
psychology.
interesting
So hopefully
one.
this is a very
We'll
easy task. And if it's at all
tackle
difficult,
such pertinent
please
topics
practice
as
it.
sleep, psychoactive drugs. So I think you'll really enjoy it. So with that being said, let's get started.
Let's look at our next slide, variations in consciousness. A little bit more practice for you there. Consciousness is not a static thing. It is constantly changing from moment to moment. William James, a very early and great psychologist, compared it to a stream. You've probably heard the phrase, perhaps anyway, stream of consciousness. So if you're daydreaming, your consciousness is slightly different than your normal waking state. Meditation, this is also true for. Hypnosis, believe it or not, we're still not in agreement on that one. Sleep is clearly a state of different consciousness. Psychoactive drug use, absolutely. If you had the unpleasant experience of jet lag, most definitely. And even sleepiness is a different state of consciousness. Our brain functions at many levels all at the same time. Can you guess what goes in the blanks? If you're thinking conscious and unconscious, you're definitely correct. Who would strongly agree with this perspective? Take a moment and think of the names of various psychology people we've learned in this course. Who is absolutely associated with the idea of the unconscious mind? Hopefully, as soon as you thought the word unconscious, Freud came into your mind. Take a moment and perhaps just enjoy this picture. I wish we were all there, but if we were, we probably wouldn't be allowed on the beach anyway. So consciousness fluctuates with our environment and our biological rhythms. This will be our next topic. But first, let's consider the tool that many psychologists studying consciousness must use. EEG, we had that way back in chapter 3 at the beginning of the course. Take a moment and see if you remember what EEG stands for. For the E, you might have thought electric, close, but not exactly. It's electro. E is much tougher. Think of maybe a medical condition, a virus that you don't want. The virus would be not corona, though that too, encephalitis. So E is for encephalo, referring to head or brain, and G, well, either graph or gram. The spelling's on the next slide, should you be having any trouble.
So indeed, EEG stands for electroencephalograph. Admittedly, a very long word. That's why I broke up the main components. It is one word without the spaces. This slide also shows the various stages of wakefulness and sleep and portrays what the brain waves that would occur typically in each stage look like. So just take a peek. You don't have to necessarily study the slide except for the EEG part.
Let's consider our biological rhythms. What is the key brain structure for many of the rhythms? Well, at least the 24-hour one. It's an endocrine gland we haven't spoke about before, at least formally, if that helps. Hopefully you said pineal. So not only do you have the hypothalamus and pituitary in your brain, another important gland would be the pineal. Its hormone, if you'd like cute recall, it begins with the letter M. Not melatonin, that's skin pigment, melanin. So it would be melanin. So let's consider 3 of our body rhythms. They all begin with the same first 5 letters. Circa means about. For example, if you go to an antique store and you pick up something and on the bottom it says circa 1900, the owner is telling you that it was made approximately at the year 1900. So circa is about. Which is the length of the first one, pronounced circadian? It's the one that's called 24 hours, though technically it's actually 25. So these would be biologically based, so it wouldn't be the evening news or something like that. These are biologically based rhythms that repeat once a day at the same time. The primary human example, the sleep cycle. If you were in a room with no doors, no windows, no live radio or TV, cell phone, you would normally keep a 24-hour cycle. You would get up roughly the same time each day and go to bed each time each day, again under control of this natural biological clock. Let's consider the next one, circa lunar. Well, hopefully you think lunar as in moon. So this would be a biological rhythm that repeats about once a month at the same time. It has absolutely nothing to do with the moon. That's how it's got its name. Can you think of a good human example? If you're thinking the female menstrual cycle, absolutely. Next one, circa annual. Well, if you know annual refers to a year, this would be a rhythm that repeats once a year at about the same time. Humans appear to have not natural ones, healthy ones, but many animals do. Take a moment and think of many animal species and what biological event happens to them every year at the same time. Let's see how many you can come up with. Well, perhaps you said hibernating, but what species? Many species hibernate. Bear, that'd be a fine example. How about growing of horns in deer or shedding of the horns, the rutting season? What about migration? You might say butterflies like the monarch, or maybe many species that migrate. Perhaps shedding of a coat, and so on. So these would all have to be events that occur once a year at the same time. Oh, how about salmon swimming upstream to spawn and so on? Turtles laying their eggs at the beach. All good examples of circa annual rhythms. Let's now consider meditation. Normally, if we were teaching in the group setting, I'd ask if anybody was a regular meditator and ask them to tell us how they did it and why they do it. And typically in the average class, I might have a meditator or two. Typically, the person says that it helps them to calm or focus or to just plain feel better. There are many techniques. Some involve concentrating on a sound like the Om sound, or sitting in the lotus position, pictured on the slide, and just feel the breathing, maybe in through the nose, out through the mouth. And try to focus on that and keeping all the stray thoughts and conversations and goals and memories at bay. It definitely takes practice. In college as an undergraduate, we were required to do PE, and one of my PE classes was a one-credit meditation class. There's been a lot of research on meditation, and there are clear benefits, psychological benefits, physical benefits. I won't say that they necessarily exceed that of regular exercise, but still, meditation is a very healthy practice, and maybe if you wouldn't explore it, maybe you should. There are definitely meditation that can be done online, free practices, and even in group practices. And in these times, it might be actually very helpful if you gave it a try. Let's now consider hypnosis. We'll define it as a state of consciousness that's characterized by deep relaxation. It was discovered, if you want to use that phrase, by Mesmer. When I think of Mesmer, I think of Las Vegas. Not that I've been there, but we all have associations, I think, of the entertainment of Las Vegas. And Mesmer was certainly an entertainer. He would have often a purple turban and a purple cape, and he would entertain, whether it was royalty or somebody very fortunate enough to have enough money to pay for him. And Mesmer would also hypnotize people for therapeutic reasons. Now, the King of France, King Louis, was not sure what to make out of Mesmer, so he commissioned not one, but two different investigations. One was headed by our own Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin investigated Mesmer, and in his conclusion, he used such words as fraud and charlatan in his final report. So clearly, Franklin, who was one of the preeminent scientists of that day and age, was thoroughly unimpressed by Mesmer, and even today, many psychologists do not believe in it, that is, as an altered state of consciousness. Many psychologists believe that people merely act the way they think a hypnotized person would act. There's no brainwave that would indicate a person is hypnotized. There's no task that we could give a person that would prove they're hypnotized. So again, is it an altered state of consciousness? Different psychologists have different opinions.
I thought we'd start our next topic, that of sleep, by viewing the very famous painting, The Sleeping Gypsy.
I hope you found the previous painting, The Sleeping Gypsy, to be interesting. I actually saw it in person, and it was by far my favorite painting in the entire museum. But let's continue on our sleep topic. For easy math, let's assume that you sleep 8 hours a day. That means you would sleep 1/3 of your day, and therefore 1/3 of your entire earthly existence. So why has this need been biologically built into us? Well, probably multiple reasons. First of all, it keeps us safe. Throughout most of human history, there weren't street lights, whether electric or gas. Dangerous things lurk after dark, whether animals or human predators. So we're much safer in our bed sleeping than we would be walking and carousing around the countryside. Also, throughout most of human existence, too much food has not been the problem. Too little is what killed most people. So when you're sleeping, your body uses less energy, and also less wear and tear are put on your parts. Thirdly, it's a time to process information. So we learn much valuable information during the day. Some is non-necessary and needs to be discarded. Others must be processed and kept. This processing occurs at night when you sleep. So therefore, if you get insufficient sleep, you are not learning effectively. And yet many students do not get necessary sleep. This will significantly impede your learning process, as well as have other emotional and other psychological effects as well. So get enough sleep whenever possible, obviously. There's also the idea that you can make up for lost sleep by sleeping more on weekends or vacations. Research shows this is clearly not the case. You cannot recap a week's worth of poor sleep by oversleeping on a weekend, and the same goes for vacations as well. So try to keep a regular sleep schedule, and you'll be physically and psychologically much better off for it. Before moving on, we probably should elaborate a little bit more on the saving energy. Many biological systems are turned to lower levels during some components of sleep. Can you think of any examples? I'll give you a moment. If you said the heart, absolutely. What about the heart, though? Well, less beats per minute, and also lowered blood pressure. Likewise, your respiration is slowed. Some hormone levels drop. Also, your body temperature drops, and so on. So, using much less energy, and therefore also less wear and tear on the systems. Now let's consider the sleep stages. At this point, I would normally ask my class to name the first stage of sleep for a normal, healthy adult. What would you say? Some students will say REM, but that would not be a first stage for a normal, healthy adult. It's often a first stage for a baby or adults with one particular sleep disorder, but not for a healthy adults. So try again. Some classes get it and some classes don't, but the answer would be for the first stage, stage 1. That usually gets a laugh. Too bad. So let's consider the sleep stages in order. As we noted, first stage, stage 1. In the past, I used to teach the brain waves associated with each stage, but I've decided that it's really not necessary for us. So let's start with stages 1 and 2. Stages 1 and 2 are considered to be the light stages of sleep. Most people are very easily awoken, whether it's the wind gently rustling your blinds, maybe a mosquito buzzing around. Most people are in a very light stage of sleep. Stage 1 usually lasts for about 10 minutes, stage 2 for about the same or slightly longer. Then you would pass into the next 2 stages, which are different. Stages 3 and 4 are the stages of deep sleep. In stage 3, Many of the body systems that we spoke about before get turned down to a lower level. Often people will see through amazing things, whether it's a street fight in the street, a ambulance going very close to the house with the sirens on, a burglar in their home. Stage 3 is very deep sleep typically, and as a mnemonic, maybe think of 3D, like in 3D glasses. 3 is the deep stage. 4 is a continuation of deep sleep. The body systems are still turned down to that lower level. Stage 4 is interesting because, though, stage 4 is the stage of sleepwalking and sleep talking. Those behaviors are actually usually outgrown, but obviously not everybody outgrows them. At this point, I usually ask for sleepwalking and sleep talking stories, and usually I get quite a selection. I'll share with you now a few of the favorites I've got over the year. One student shared a case of divorce related to sleep talking. Well, sleep talking was a secondary cause. The primary cause was talking about one's infidelity in a lot of detail. Another interesting story, the student said that he watched a housemate come down the stairs and stand in front of the couch, and they were kind of puzzled. And then the housemate lifted up a cushion. Again, they were puzzled. By the time that they were figuring out what was going on, it was too late. But at least when he was done, he put the cushion down. And I've heard many stories of sleep urination, not only under couch cushions, but out windows, in ventilation ducts, in refrigerators, in clean laundry, in dirty laundry, in a Pepsi can sitting out in the open. But my favorite by far was a friend of mine, and apparently when he was a child, in his grandmother's open snoring mouth. Anyway, so the stage of sleepwalking and sleep talking. I've had couples share that they've had fights because, well, you agreed that we would buy this. Well, people can't contract legally when they're asleep. And I have also had stories of sleep driving and sleep eating. Some medications are particularly associated with problems with sleeping behaviors. So that's just a small selection of some of the more interesting stories I've had over the years. Oh, one last one. A student shared that her brother slept in the buff, and she got sick of watching it walk by every night. And so she asked him to wear clothing. He would not. He insisted he was not a sleepwalker. Well, that was in the days of the Polaroid Instamatic. She took a couple and actually posted that at work, or actually at school. It did not cure him of sleepwalking, but it definitely cured him of sleepwalking in the buff. I'm sorry that I couldn't hear your stories this year. It's always interesting. So stages 1, 2, 3, 4. Stage 3 is about the same length as the previous stages, about 15 minutes. Stage 4 is much longer, about 40. That's a nice mnemonic, 4 and 40. Why is stage 4 so long? Because it's like a car. You're driving, the car stops, and then the car gets still in reverse. So you go through stage 4 one way, and then you kind of back through it the other way, because you're going backwards to 3, back to 2, or 1 or not, depends on the time of the night, and then and only then, REM. What does REM stand for? Hopefully you said rapid eye movement, because the eyes will be moving rapidly in this stage, hopefully under their closed eyelids, because it's really creepy when they're partially open. And you might have seen your dog or your cat or other people with their eyes moving rapidly. They're in REM sleep. This is our dream sleep. The vast majority of dreams occur in this time of REM sleep. During REM, the biological systems get turned back to their waking normal levels. And indeed, brainwaves in REM sleep look very much like brainwaves in normal sleep. Alcohol interferes with REM sleep. So if you drink a lot of alcohol, you will not get a normal night's sleep. In REM sleep, there's an interesting phenomenon which is very normal and healthy called sleep paralysis. So if you've seen maybe your pet, it might be doing a little twitching. The paw might move, the whiskers might twitch, but the animal is incapable of large whole-scale body movements. This paralysis is protective. It is actually a sleep disorder when a person does not have this paralysis. And I've had stories over the years of students who did not have this normal paralysis. One broke his hand in a nightstand. Another one broke their partner's nose, also by flailing out. So it's a protective device protecting you and those around you. So when the monster is chasing you, you do not flail out and self-injure. Now, some people unfortunately have a problem. When they wake up, the muscle paralysis is still on, so they're fully awake and they cannot move or make a sound. If this has happened to you, that's what's going on. So try to remember to being calm, and remember this is just your safety device, just a little bit slow to turn off. So I know it's frightening, but it's very common for this to happen. In a typical class, a quarter, a fifth, sometimes more than that, will say that they've experienced this. Again, it's just your normal safety device, a little slow to turn off. You'll continue the cycle throughout the night. 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, REM, round and round. But by morning, often stages 3 and 4 disappear altogether. Have you noticed when your alarm clock goes off, you're pretty much always dreaming? So again, by the end of the night, the cycling continues, but 3 and 4 tend to drop away. And that would be a very normal night's sleep. And I hope you do get very normal night sleeps. The Nightmare is another famous painting on the topic of sleep. Have you ever seen it before? Right now we're going to focus on 3 sleep disorders. Obviously there's more. We just mentioned the Rem Sleep movement disorder, or maybe you perhaps suffer, or someone in your family suffers from restless leg syndrome. But we're going to focus on these 3: narcolepsy, sleep apnea, and insomnia. Let's consider narcolepsy. Which one is narcolepsy? If you're thinking about the person that falls asleep anytime, anywhere, any circumstances, you're indeed correct. It could be at a checkout line at the supermarket. It could be teaching a class. It could be sitting in the cafeteria. Literally anytime and anywhere. And typically when this happens, their body will collapse. It's called cataplexy, but their body will collapse and they will be sleeping. And typically, external stimulation does not release them from this cataplexy state and narcolepsy. This disorder is treatable, but often the treatments are less than satisfactory. Let's next consider sleep apnea. Which one is this? If you're saying stop breathing, yes, that's correct. This person will periodically stop breathing at night, and not just a couple times, believe it or not, that's very normal, but often dozens or even hundreds of times. When they stop breathing, their blood oxygen level will drop and drop and drop. At a certain point, they'll start gasping, probably never even fully coming to consciousness. All they typically know is that they're exhausted and do not feel refreshed in the morning. What are some signs that a person might have sleep apnea? Well, if you have a partner, your partner might tell you that they hear you stop breathing. They can give the partner insomnia because they're often listening to see if you stop breathing and maybe give you a poke, so it should be treated for your sake and theirs. But back to the question, what are some symptoms? Well, constantly feeling tired and non-refreshed from sleep is a symptom. If a person snores very loudly, that is another symptom as well. Often people with apnea have a typical body profile. They tend to be heavy, particularly on the neck. Not necessarily fat on the neck. It could be a person that's very muscular, maybe a football person or a weightlifter that's got a very heavy neck. But again, the tiredness, the snoring, and a certain build are all symptoms a person might have apnea. Another one less common that's been shared with me by various students is dreams that are reoccurring, and in these dreams you're not able to breathe. You're underwater and you can't breathe. You're underwater and you don't have to breathe. You're dreaming that something is sitting on your chest and you can't breathe. So if you're having recurring dreams about not breathing, it's quite possible you're not breathing. This definitely should be treated. People with sleep apnea do have a much higher rate of heart disease. What is a treatment? Well, you've probably seen or at least heard of the CPAP device, or if you were at an airport ever and you see people carrying something that's not exactly in the shape of a briefcase, that's probably their CPAP. With some people that are borderline sleep apnea, just like for the borderline diabetic, sometimes a little bit of weight loss might get to the person back to the threshold where they don't have sleep apnea. Next, we'll consider insomnia. Let's now turn our focus to insomnia. Insomnia is the most common sleep disorder. It is very likely that all of us will experience insomnia, and some of us more than once. In insomnia, perhaps the person cannot fall asleep in a reasonably quick manner. Others may have this and/or, once they're awoken, cannot return to sleep. Many people, when they experience insomnia, will turn to medications, either prescription or over-the-counter. Take a moment and see if you can think of any disadvantages to helping to turn to medications to help us cope. Some medications are addicting, so the person will find that they're less and less effective. And if they stop taking them altogether, they'll have a rebound effect in which they'll even have more significant insomnia issues. Others can be a risk of overdose. Others are associated with sleep behaviors such as sleep walking, sleep driving, sleep eating, and so on. So if we're not to turn to medications, what are some non-medication options? Before you go to the next slide, consider, if you can, non-drug ways to cope with insomnia. Although this slide has many suggestions, it is definitely just a partial list. Teas for sleeping, these would obviously be decaffeinated beverages. Don't be surprised that as you grow older, your sensitivity to caffeine changes. For many people, when they increase in age, even 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock at night is too late to have caffeine. What about exercise? Depends when you do it. Early in the day, stress reducer, very helpful. But for many people, late afternoon and beyond, not a good time to exercise. It activates the branch of the nervous system associated with stress and emergencies, the activation branch. Was that sympathetic or parasympathetic? Hopefully you said sympathetic. Avoid stimulants, such as the caffeine we just mentioned, or things like cocaine, amphetamines, and such. Always good advice. Next one, avoid alcohol. Although alcohol is a depressant drug, as we noted, it does alter the sleep cycle. Next, as mentioned, deal with stressors. Don't ruminate, just don't think about them. Many people are busy throughout the day, and then when they lay in bed, their mind goes to their stressors. So deal with stressors, just don't think about them. Warm milk actually has tryptophan, a serotonin precursor. It actually can be helpful. Routine, have a regular bedtime routine. Dim the lights. Most people do much better with dim lights. Avoid the computer screen in the evening and use a setting for evening use. I find that I normally might fall to bed and get sleepy around maybe 10, 11 o'clock. If I've been working on the computer all evening, I can go to 12, 1 o'clock easily and then lay in bed for an hour or two and not be able to get to sleep. So consider your computer screens. Proper sleep environment. Well, what exactly would that mean? So dim lights. For most people, cooler rather than warmer. Sound is an interesting variable to consider. I would normally ask people to raise their hands if they need a certain amount of sleep, and that would be roughly half the class. And I ask the class after that, how many of you need a very, very quiet environment? And roughly the other half of the class would raise their hands. And I also suggest don't hook up with these people. Next, consider reserving the bed for sleep. Let's say that you go to a university or a four-year college and you have a shared room. And you do everything in this room in your bed. You study it in bed, you have conversations with your housemate or your roommate in the bed, you text your friends in the bed, and so on. You pay your bills in bed, so the bed has become your entire office. Well, you've conditioned yourself that the bed is a place to do lively activity. So reserve the bed for sleep. Sex is the exception. That's still allowed in bed. We don't want to get other problems, but other than that, reserve your bed for sleep. For older adults, it might be avoiding overfullness. This can get into the acid reflux realm. So next time you have insomnia, if it's more than a day, consider these particular variables, and often a combination of them will be successful in alleviating your insomnia.